as the former captain of the 2nd Division, head of the Omnitsukido Corps, and eventually a mentor to Ichigo and his friends in the Soul Society arc, Yodoichi Shihoin was a trailblazing example of how to write a good, strong shonen female character. Yep, that's right, of all the votes in the last character analysis video, Yodoichi Shihoin came out on top, so that's the character we're going to be looking at in today's video, although Ugram Hashwolf came in a pretty close 2nd place, so he's actually going to be the one we do after Yodoichi. But as with the last video, this time I'm leaving a new set of 3 characters down below for you guys to vote on for who you'd like to see in the next character analysis. And before we begin talking about Yodoichi, guys, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to hit that button. You're in absolutely the right place for all the Bleach content you could ever want in the run-up to and beyond the anime's return in 2021. We're doing character analysis, we're doing discussions, rankings, all that sort of thing. Bleach Brave Souls, if you love that sort of thing, hit the subscribe button now. And join the community as well, because we've got a community of people here who love Bleach. So follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. And of course, don't forget to hit the notification bell if you are already subscribed, and you will get my weekly Bleach videos in your subscription box. And you hopefully won't miss a single one. Kicking things off with Yodoichi then, and she's definitely one of the most interesting characters in the series and a real fan favourite as well. And I think a lot of that comes down to her personality. She's intelligent, she's witty, but she is also very strong and knows when to take a situation seriously. In many ways, she is the female counterpart to Kisuke. They share more than just a serious friendship. They are both incredibly powerful people, and they both have great insight into the world and goings-on in Bleach. In fact, Yodoichi was one of my favourite characters for quite a while in the series. She plays a really major role in the Soul Society arc, down on the front lines with Ichigo and his friends, which I always really admired. But unfortunately, like a lot of characters, Yodoichi is sidelined really hard in the Arrancar arc. The Arrancar arc is very unforgiving towards a lot of Soul Society fan favourites, unfortunately, and Yodoichi takes the brunt of that pretty badly. She also doesn't even appear in the Lost Agent arc, which is a shame. She does return to some kind of prominence in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, albeit she doesn't appear until essentially halfway through that story. But it's more her ending that I take issue with there in that arc, but that's something we'll get into when we get to it. Now, Yodoichi is actually featured in Bleach quite a fair bit and has a lengthy character lifespan. She first appears in chapter 51, and her last appearance in the canon manga is 664, with her slightly disappointing ending, which we'll get to in the future. But regardless, like I said, Yodoichi for a long time was the poster child of strong female characters, characters who could duke it out with the best of them in the series. And Yodoichi is undeniably incredibly powerful, but she's also got that sass and that wit that makes her incredibly enjoyable, and especially back in the days of the Soul Society arc, her slightly more flippant personality really put her at odds with these sort of more serious captains who were the enemies at the time, especially her rival Byakuya. So, known as the Goddess of Flash, let's get into Yodoichi Shihoin's overall role in the story. Born into one of the 5 major noble houses of the Soul Society, Yodoichi comes from an interesting position of aristocracy. Early in the series, the only other character we really knew that came from this level of power in the Soul Society was, of course, Byakuya, and Byakuya was the stalwart, staunch defender of Soul Society's laws. Byakuya essentially was Soul Society's laws personified. Yodoichi, of course, is very much the opposite. We don't really hear much about the Shihoin household as much as you do the Kuchiki household, but Yodoichi is definitely something of an outlier. She is a pariah. She's obviously abandoned the Soul Society for reasons at points you don't really know yet. Yet she's still very in tune with everything going on within the Seirei, and I really liked that. And her eventual reintroduction into that world alongside Urahara is a satisfying character arc to see. There's plenty of mystery surrounding Yodoichi, as there generally is with these kind of characters in fiction. Although Yodoichi is no one's parent, she kind of comes under that trope where the parents are hiding big secrets. In this case, it would be Ishin, but he is obviously friends with Kisuke. They obviously all know each other by proxy. And so whenever Yodoichi was around, we were always like, there's more to this character than meets the eye, and I can't wait to find out more about her history and what eventually caused the schism between her and the Soul Society. When the series starts, however, it's a world away from where the character eventually ends up. And you know, I often forget that Yodoichi spent a lot of the Soul Society arc as a cat, because you just never see it again, and it's always a bit of a shame. I think it goes completely unexplained, although I'm not entirely sure. But I think it goes completely unexplained as to how she can actually turn into a cat. But it's a cool thing that makes her definitely stand out among the cast, that much is for sure. Yodoichi appears as a cat initially with a very deep, manly voice, obviously meant to throw you off, which I always thought was quite interesting. I definitely thought it was going to be a man. If I actually thought it was just a cat that could talk to start with. Then obviously you find out later on that they have a true form and it becomes Yodoichi in one of Bleach's probably most famous and funny scenes when she appears completely naked before, shall we say, a very embarrassed Ichigo. A lot of people love that scene. It's definitely one of the more memorable ones. I remember getting a really good laugh out of that moment. And it really showcases Yodoichi's incredibly outgoing, flirtatious, but also completely in control personality that I always loved. She knows when she's messing with people, just like the way she used to mess with young Byakuya over 100 years ago. So I really like that Joker aspect of her character, and it's really personified well in that scene. However, she starts the series considerably more serious than maybe she ends up later on. She acts as the mentor, not just for Ichigo, but also for Orihime and Chad as well. And it's really thanks to Yodoichi that the two of those begin to actually start using their powers for the first time. As a cat, Yodoichi leads them into the Soul Society, and obviously Yodoichi has a load of knowledge about things like Jidambo and the captains and the structure of Seirete. I'm surprised that Yodoichi didn't give them a little bit more info, if possible, because she literally was a captain. And of course, this does kind of lead you on to... It's not really a plot hole, because they do kind of address it in the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, but it's like Yodoichi knows that Aizen is a villain. So does Kisuke, and none of them ever bring it up. And I think the reason for that is addressed in Turn Back the Pendulum. You get the impression that the Gote wouldn't believe them even if they tried to tell them, because Kisuke does try to tell them in Turn Back the Pendulum. But I can't help but think, like, if Yodoichi had appeared in front of, like, Kyoraku and taken him aside and been like, and broken it down and been like, look, don't tell anyone I'm here, but Aizen's evil, he's conducting holification experiments, all these little things. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but I just always found that kind of weird. But yeah, so Yodoichi introduces them to the Seirete and how to break in. She introduces them to her friend Kukaku Shiba, obviously a member of another noble house, which has since fallen since before the start of the story. But again, more questions are raised as to Yodoichi's past, which I always found to make the character very compelling. Yodoichi doesn't do a whole lot in the actual invasion of Soul Society, rather than duck around and help people out if they need it, particularly Ichigo. But once she reveals her true form to him, things really start to heat up for this character. One of my favourite moments for Yodoichi in this arc is when she stops Byakuya from activating Senmon Zakura, using that wrapping, and the pose she makes where she appears on the ground, very ninja-esque, definitely one of the coolest looking moves she's pulled off in the series, and you get this really nice relationship between her and Byakuya start to boil up, where you find out they have this rivalry about who's the fastest and who can catch who, and unfortunately they never really interact again in the rest of the series, but you do obviously find out that this stems from Turn Back the Pendulum, so I always found that to be pretty interesting. But Yodoichi is very much the mentor on the front line. She is the field mentor in this case, more so than Kisuke, really, in many attributes. But she's the one who helps Ichigo learn Bankai in 3 days using the Tenshin Tai, so that's a pretty major moment for Yodoichi, and it's really cool that she helps him work with Zangetsu to learn that. I think that's really, really cool. Calls into question her own knowledge of the Zanpakuto, because obviously she must be very knowledgeable, but Yodoichi and Zanpakuto is a topic I'll get into later in this, and honestly a video for itself. But for now we're just looking at her role in the story, and she does play that kind of mentor role to Ichigo. When the kind of finale of the Soul Society arc rolls around, you get to get a bit more insight into some of the relationships she had back when she was in the Gote 13. And it's here that you do kind of find out, actually, yeah, she was a previous captain. She was very well respected and also predominantly adored by this character Soifon. And Yodoichi versus Soifon is, in my opinion, the best fight Yodoichi has in the series. It's emotionally charged. You get to see these two ninjas properly going hand-to-hand combat against each other. They're two Hakuda masters, and it's the only real time in the series you get a fight like this. And I love the way Yodoichi uses additional weapons, like things like Anken, I think they're called, when she flings them with a kick, like the little daggers that go towards Soifon. It's just a really, really cool fight, and it's the best fight Yodoichi gets. It's probably the coolest showcasing of Shunko. I love the way she takes out all the Omnitsukido guys who turn up. Just again to kind of hammer home that no one is as fast as Yodoichi. It would have been really interesting to kind of compare her to Tenjiro, because Tenjiro obviously was apparently called Lightning Fast Tenjiro. Very similar kind of monikers, but Tenjiro never really demonstrates any kind of speed, apart from when he gets behind Soifon that one time, I guess, so there's nothing much to compare there, unfortunately, but her fight with Soifon, regardless, is really awesome. And you obviously get the fantastic moment at the end when Soifon kind of breaks down, loses her composure. And what's cool is that despite appearing to be pushed into a corner by Soifon, Yodoichi does remain very much in control and is able to completely nullify Soifon's abilities with that really cool Haki Sosai move, I think it's called, where they kind of just... she, like, cancels out everything that she can do. And that was just really, really cool. I thought it was an awesome moment, and that's a really good fight. After that, Yodoichi is there to try and apprehend Aizen, but he obviously gets away, and she's not really seen too much after that. And by that I mean for the majority of the series until the 1000-Year Blood War arc, because it's now time for the Arrancar arc. Now, Yodoichi does appear at the start of this storyline fairly prominently. She comes and helps out Orihime, Ichigo, and Chad against Yami, the first time you ever see an Espada in combat. And Yami is supposed to be fearsome, but he's also, like, not undefeatable, because you have to remember that Ichigo cleaves his arm off no problem, but then starts freaking out because his powers are going all over the place, and it's starting to, like, crush his mind and stuff like that. But when Yodoichi arrives, she's fully in control of the fight, and she absolutely decimates Yami, again, going hand-to-hand with him and just completely annihilating him, although his Hiero does wound her a little bit, which could be the reason she's out of action for basically the entire of the rest of the arc. So Yodoichi arrives with Kisuke and fights Yami and eventually kind of confronts Ulquiorra, but after that she really isn't seen again for the entire of the Arrancar arc. She's seen very briefly to bring Orihime to Kisuke when he tells her that she can't fight anymore. But after that, she is just gone. Completely gone. And she does absolutely nothing else for ages. And you kind of wonder, like, why didn't Kubo send her to Hueco Mundo with Ichigo and the others? And I guess it's because Ichigo kind of went off covertly without anyone really knowing. But I think Yodoichi would have gone with, and obviously Kisuke knew as well. So maybe it was her wounds that were holding her back. It's really hard to say for sure why she didn't go with him. Maybe Kubo himself thought it was too similar to the Soul Society arc to send Yodoichi with them as well, and it already was quite similar as it is. Regardless, Yodoichi is not seen again until the Turn Back the Pendulum flashback, and this is really cool because you get to see Yodoichi in her prime as the captain of the 2nd Division, working with Soifon, and she's also the leader of the Stealth Corps. It's really nice because you get to see Yodoichi in a position of authority among the Soul Society. She is also a noble as well, remember. But she doesn't seem to take her position too seriously. That's not to say she's naive, because she's obviously not. She's one of these characters, again, who has great insight, I feel. And she knows people, particularly Kisuke. She knows him incredibly well, on a level better than almost anyone else. So she's fully... able to kind of put faith in him, you know, because a lot of weird stuff is going on in Turn Back the Pendulum. A lot of people are disappearing, some people are up to no good, but Yodoichi never loses faith in Kisuke. One of the things I love the most about this arc is actually her characterization towards the end. When Kisuke and Tessai are put on trial, I love that Yodoichi doesn't hesitate. Like, she is in there, taking on Central 46, essentially committing high treason, just to bust Kisuke and Tessai out of prison. Because she knows in her heart that they haven't done anything wrong, and I love that. That's a great intuition. It really shows the bond that she has with Kisuke. Apparently Tessai grew up in her mansion alongside Kisuke, but there's never any inclination of any kind of relationship between Yodoichi and Tessai, really, which is a bit weird, but... they're all supposed to be friends, but I love that she just gets in there, basically throws her career and her life away for Kisuke and Tessai. And it's interesting to see that perspective between her relationship with those guys and her relationship with Soifon, because although she did kind of have a mentor relationship with Soifon, she threw it all away in the blink of an eye for Kisuke and Tessai. And I thought that was really interesting. And obviously that affects Soifon negatively, and it doesn't seem to be anything that Yodoichi's really thought about. And that's because Yodoichi is, again, one of these characters a bit similar to Kisuke, who's very big picture-minded. And unfortunately, people get sort of left to the wayside unintentionally in that regard. So I love how she went straight for Kisuke and Tessai, regardless of any rule-breaking. and got them out of there on that night that changed everything, and I thought that was really cool. However, we then get to the fake Karakura Town arc, and once again, she's absolutely nowhere to be seen. She does arrive eventually alongside Kisuke and Isshin. The two of them manage to restrain Aizen, and then Yodoichi attacks him from above. She's actually wearing now special Hiero armor on both her arms and her legs, and I remember back in the day, I used to read the spoilers every week on like One Manga forums, and I eventually stopped in the Lost Asian arc because I realised it was kind of ruining the series for me. But I remember seeing the image of Yodoichi, and I thought to myself, like, is that her Shikai? I got really excited about that, but no, it was just some armor that Kisuke created to counter. I assume he assumed that Aizen might have Hiero or something akin to that. Again, Yodoichi doesn't do a whole lot here. You get to see Shunko for the first time in a very long time, which was a really cool moment, but she just kind of wails on Aizen a little bit before getting defeated, and it's a bit of a shame because she doesn't really do anything in that final battle, other than land a few cool punches on Aizen. But yeah, again, she has some nice moments with Kisuke, but it's really nothing to write home about. She's defeated pretty quickly. And it begs the question of, like, where is her Zanpakuto toe? And I'll get into that. We're nearly done with her story role, so we'll get into that in a minute. But Lost Agent arc comes around, Yodoichi nowhere to be seen. And that's a really weird one, because Yodoichi is stationed in Karakura Town. All the action is happening in the human world. You think she would help Ichigo out. She's in a prime position to help him out, but then so is Kisuke, and no one really does. That's one of the primary issues with the Lost Agent arc, in my opinion, is the suspension of disbelief surrounding the people who are already in Karakura Town. Ichigo used to have perfectly good relationships with all these people, and then when that arc comes around, apparently no one talks to him, so that is a weird one. Yodoichi nowhere to be seen, but she does donate her Reiatsu to help Ichigo gain his powers back, so that's nice. Final arc rolls around, and Yodoichi, like I said, returns to some form of prominence in this arc. She appears about halfway through. You find out that Kisuke's had her doing a job, which I actually really like. I like that she's not been sitting on her hands. She actually has been doing something. That's why she's not been around. And she's been collecting the energy from the rifts between the worlds to give them enough power to get up into the Royal Palace. Obviously, Yodoichi's return and Ganju's return are basically just there to fuel the Soul Society arc nostalgia, something Kubo even mentions himself in the storyline. But it's really nice to have her there regardless, and, you know, she does get some cool moments. It's really cool how she is the one to try and save the Soul King, like she forms the barrier around him. She even tries to take on Yhwach at one point, but gets her arm ripped off by Pernida. Really cool stuff overall for Yodoichi, and I love that she's integrated back into the main group again as a major point of focus during this sort of last third or so of the arc. I really like that. I thought that was really cool. She doesn't get much in the way of introspection in the final arc. She's pretty much just there, sort of flash and no real substance. She's there to fight, basically, which I don't hate. But it's also cool how she engineers the whole back route into the Royal Palace. I thought that was really cool. She's clearly working with Grimjo, with Ruruka, and with Yukio to formulate this plan to bust them into the Soul Palace. And I thought that was really cool. Again, that was nice to see Yodoichi working behind the scenes. Then they eventually arrive in Varvelt, and things get weird. Things get really weird. Now, Kubo has never necessarily been one to shy away from fan service, but he's never been, like, absurdly blatant about it, especially when it comes to characters like Yodoichi, who is always treated with a degree of respect, you know, because she is a respectable character. She's a very strong character. You know, she's laughy, she's jokey, she's flirty, you know, she can take the mick out of people by appearing in front of them completely naked. But it's never been done without her knowledge, if that makes sense. So the whole final section where she fights Askin was always kind of weird to me, because Kubo goes hard on the fan service. And I don't know if it's just because the series was ending or something like that, but it does in many ways reduce Yodoichi down to just a surface level character. And even the fighting that she does is nowhere near as interesting as it used to be. She's almost exclusively using Shunko at this point. She does have a really nice moment where she catches one of Askin's arrows and just launches it back into his chest. I'd have loved to have seen more of that sort of thing. But Kubo goes really heavy on the fan service. He even reduces her to a point where she can't actually talk. I thought the whole electric cat form, while technically being pretty accurate for Yodoichi, was kind of weird. It didn't sit quite right with me when I was reading it. I was like, I don't know if this is supposed to be being played up for laughs or if it's just a bit weird, or if it is hinting at something romantic between Kisuke and Yodoichi, but considering she's not even in her own mind at the moment, it's not exactly what I'd call romantic, but it was weird. It was weird seeing Yodoichi reduced to an animal, essentially, and the worst part about it is that's the last time you ever see her in the manga, which I didn't like at all. It's similar to Kisuke. They're both defeated in their battle with Askin. Although Askin dies, both of them are essentially rendered unconscious, and you never see them again. So as far as, if you never read Can't Fear Your Own World, they could be dead. Obviously, Yodoichi does return in Can't Fear Your Own World. But, yeah, it's just a really weird ending. I don't know why Kubo decided to do that. It's an interesting thought process. I guess towards the end of the series, he was like, I'm just going to go full fan service with Yodoichi. Doesn't really matter anymore. And like I said, it's not like he hasn't ever done it before. You know, he's done it with characters like Matsumoto. It's like built on fan service. And he has had plenty of jokey moments like that, but it's just kind of weirdly handled here. I felt the whole cat transformation thing could have been handled better. But that's the end of her story in the canon manga, unfortunately. She doesn't do anything else. So overall, the ending of Yodoichi's character is a bit of a disappointment, I think, for the most part. It really is only the last 2 chapters or so that she's in that I find to be disappointing, but they are the final chapters you ever see her, which is a shame. You also get introduced to her younger brother, Yushiro Shihoin, which I was always a little bit iffy on. I felt he was pretty unnecessary. I felt the role he played in the fight against Askin could have just as easily been done by Soifon, and then have their relationship actually built on some more, because their relationship's kind of a weird one, which I'll get into in the relationship section. But there's one thing about it you might not have noticed, which does make it kind of weird. Before we get onto that, however, let's talk, now that we've finished essentially her role in the story. She does appear in Can't Fear Your Own World. I haven't actually finished that book properly yet, but from what I know, she actually returns to the Soul Society to begin teaching, which I think is actually really cool for her character. I loved the whole character arc of her and Kisuke eventually being accepted back into the Soul Society in whatever form they chose. But yeah, so that's essentially Yodoichi in a nutshell. That's her role in the story. She goes from being a frontline mentor to being really pushed to the background, to then being sort of brought back out, but only really on a sort of surface level, where she's just there to fight. And even then, I didn't find the fighting to be anywhere near as interesting or as well choreographed as it was again in the fight against Soifon. So it felt like, in a way, Kubo just wanted to use Shunkai with her so he could draw massive panels of electricity and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. For me, Yodoichi did become kind of disappointing towards the end. But let's now get into, I want to talk about her Zanpakuto more than anything, because I think this could be a whole video in and of itself. Now, Yodoichi's Zanpakuto, does she have one? Doesn't she have one? What is the Zanpakuto and why doesn't she use it is a hotly debated topic in the Bleach community. And in this video, I'm not going to go super deep into the details about her Zanpakuto, whether she has one or not, or what I think, because I think that's a video in and of itself. What I do find weird about Yodoichi, however, is I'm guessing the reason she is primarily a Hakudo user is because Kubo wanted her to be completely unique in her fighting style, because there isn't really anyone else like that in Bleach. But her not using her Zanpakuto in pretty dire situations is a weird choice. Now, the fight against Aizen is irritating for a number of reasons, one of which being that no one in that battle uses their full power for no reason. Why Kisuke doesn't use his Bankai, I have absolutely no idea. It really could have helped out, being able to reconstruct anything. Isshin never doesn't even use Engetsu Shikai in that fight. He just uses Egetsuga Tensho, and Yodoichi just uses her hands and her feet. So I don't know why no one really seemed to try in that battle when the fate of Karakura was actually on the line. Yodoichi, again, though, is particularly weird because she doesn't use her Zanpakuto at all. So you have to wonder, is she weaker when she uses her Zanpakuto, or does she have maybe some bad relationship with the weapon that we don't really know about? It would have been really interesting to find out what it was, go into some kind of detail about that. And what's really annoying to me is that I feel like Kubo had the perfect opportunity to reveal her Zanpakuto, and I feel like what we've seen already correlates to a Shikai and a Bankai. And what I'm talking about is the Askin fight. I think it would have made perfect sense for Raijin Senkei to be Yodoichi's Shikai. I know it's supposed to be her Shunko, but I could easily see her with a lightning Zanpakuto. It goes with everything that she's got. It goes with her ultra-fast speed. It goes with her Lightning Shunko. I think a Lightning Zanpakuto would make perfect sense. There aren't many of them in the series, and that Raijin Senkei would make an awesome Shikai. It could still manifest in a hand-to-hand fighting style, but at the very least we would have been able to see what her Zanpakuto was and put that mystery to bed. I could just definitely see her going up against Askin, getting like a little sort of blade out and saying some kind of release form, and it turns into the electric ring of orbs around her. Easy Shikai, done. And her Bankai could be the electric cat form, but she keeps her mind in this form. It's a transformation she actually chooses to make. Therefore, everybody's happy. I think it just would have been so easy to do that, and I get that Kubo wants to show her as a Shunko master, but we've seen Shunko a lot at this point. It features a lot in the final arc. You know, Soifon uses it against BG9, Yushiro uses it against Askin. I'm not sure we really needed that, although it was cool seeing a fire one, I guess, but yeah, Yodoichi, I just think that would have made a very easy Shikai Bankai, there you go, done, sorted situation, but Kubo didn't go down that route, and so we miss out on her Zanpakuto entirely, so it just raises a lot of questions as to why she doesn't use it. Maybe it's revealed in Can't Fear Your Own World down the line that I haven't got to yet, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't know why she wouldn't use the weapon that, you know, she's supposed to have a good relationship with, as all Shinigami supposedly do. Even if it's not a good relationship, like someone say, like Hisagi and Kazushini, it's still a relationship that's intrinsic to every Shinigami's soul. It's a part of you. So the fact that she doesn't use her Zanpakuto at all kind of insinuates that she is neglecting that partnership, and you have to wonder what their relationship's actually like. So it's a weird situation. Moving on to Yodoichi's battles, and again, she doesn't have that many, really. I think she has about 3 or 4 across the whole series. Like I said, her first major fight really comes against Soifon, and that is the best one, in my opinion. It peaks there for Yodoichi. I absolutely love the choreography in this fight. I think it's the only fight that really makes her look like a proper sort of ninja. And the same goes for Soifon as well. I love the choreography where they do that kind of move where they lock each other's feet in midair, and it's just really cool stuff. And they use Shunko in a really cool way in that battle as well. After that, she gets a brief fight against Yami at the start of the Arankar arc, which is more of a beatdown than anything else. And then she fights Aizen right at the end of the Fake Karakura Town arc, which is maybe one of the more disappointing ones because she just doesn't really do anything. She lands a couple of good hits on him, including a nice, pretty satisfying Shunko punch as well. But aside from that, she doesn't really add much to that fight, which is a big shame, apart from a bit of comedy here and there. And then the last fight she has is against Askin, alongside Kisuke, and this actually is not a bad fight. If you kind of look past the weirdness of the whole transformation scene, it's actually a pretty good fight, and Yodoichi does have some cool moments in it. Like, I love how she just blasts Askin with the Raijin Senkei at the start of the fight. That's really cool. Like I said before, I wish that Soifon had arrived instead of Yushiro, but as it stands, Yodoichi does actually get a pretty decent moment in that fight. Then she turns into the cat. Askin apparently somehow lands a gift ball on her, which I find difficult to imagine considering how, you know, skillful she is and she's so fast, but he manages it off screen and she ends up basically completely poisoned. In her cat form, you know, her Reiatsu is constantly changing. It's a very convenient counter to Askin's death-dealing ability, but it's cool nonetheless, and Kubo does draw some really cool panels in this, especially the close-up of Yodoichi where she essentially just runs at Askin and then strikes him in the face. Really cool stuff overall from her, and I don't hate her cat form, I just think it could have been handled better, especially as it's the last time we ever see this character. She doesn't appear again, and both Kisuke and Yodoichi get a bit of a disappointing finish, in my opinion, but of her fights, I do think the Soifon one is by far the best, but the Askin fight's pretty good as well. But for someone who is as physically strong as Yodoichi, I think the majority of her battles are a little underwhelming, and I just wish that she had been given a chance to do and show more. And finally, we get to her relationships, and I think the first one we need to talk about is the relationship with Soifon. Now, Soifon obviously essentially was her underling back in the days of serving her as not only the head of the noble house, but also the captain of the 2nd Division, and Soifon was completely inundated with Yodoichi. You know, whether she was actually in love with her is difficult to say. There's definitely some signals there. But regardless, she highly respected her, wanted to be her, and just overall completely adored Yodoichi, so much so that it utterly broke her heart when Yodoichi abandoned her. But what's fascinating about this is that Soifon, much like Byakuya, is very firmly about the law, following the rules, And you're supposed to think that the reason she was unhappy was because Yodoichi betrayed the Soul Society, but that's not the reason. The reason is simply that she didn't take Soifon with her. And I thought that was a really cool, really nice character moment. What's weird about the Yodoichi-Soifon relationship, however, that I mentioned earlier, is the majority of that relationship actually stems from the anime. Most of it is not canon in the slightest. The anime facilitated this idea that Soifon was completely obsessed with Yodoichi to the point of like being absolutely in love with her. After the Soul Society arc, Yodoichi and Soifon never ever talk again in the manga, which is really, really weird. And I only really realised that recently, but Yodoichi and Soifon, they mostly spend all their time together in the anime, in fillers and stuff like that, and it really built up this idea that Soifon has this infatuation with the character. Now, maybe she does, because Kubo seemed to run with that a little bit in the later arcs. In the Lost Agent arc, Soifon kind of randomly mentions that Ichigo is useless without Yodoichi by his side, despite the fact that Ichigo and Yodoichi barely spent any time together in the Uranka arc. That was kind of weird. And then, obviously, in the final arc, Soifon obsesses over Yushiro, which I kind of liked. I thought that was pretty funny. Wanting to give him like pocket money and stuff. That was cool. That was definitely Kubo building on the relationship that had been built in the anime. So it's kind of, but again, that's proof of how the anime can really flesh out a lot of these characters. Like, people love the dynamic between Yodoichi and Soifon, but the truth is that it's barely in the manga at all. The foundation of it is, for sure, in the Soul Society arc, but the actual meat of that relationship comes from anime fillers, essentially. But that's fine, you know, I like that, I think it's funny, I think it's well done, but it is just kind of weird to think about that one of her major relationships is not really addressed again after that arc, so that's kind of weird. But moving on, the next kind of major relationship is, I would definitely say, Kisuke. Now, I've been over this already in Kisuke's own video. I mentioned in that video that I didn't really necessarily think there was anything beyond just deep friendship between these two. I could be wrong. You know, people have said that doesn't seem likely, that they actually probably are in love, or at the very least sleeping together. And maybe that is true. I don't know. But I've always kind of thought that they were very much childhood best friends who trusted each other completely, and were just very much on the same level. Now, they might be romantic. I don't know. Personally, I don't think Bleach is ever likely to delve too far into that sort of side of things, because Kubo even said himself that this is not a romance manga. And so most of those relationships would only ever really be skin deep. I think what you're supposed to take away from this relationship anyway is that they are very, very good friends, who always have each other's backs. You know, they're very rarely seen without one another. But I think, you know, there's definitely a possibility there. I don't think it's the most important part of their relationship. I think it's definitely the trials and the experiences they've shared together that culminated in Yodoichi just completely throwing the Soul Society aside for Kisuke because she believed in him. And I thought that was always really interesting, and I think that's the crux of their relationship, definitely. And finally, I would say the last major relationship for Yodoichi is that with Ichigo. And like I said, she is one of his major mentors in the Soul Society arc. Now, Ichigo kind of goes through different mentors. I'd say Shinji is probably the main one for him in the Uranka arc. Then you have Ginjo in the Lost Agent. And he's kind of gone beyond the point of needing a mentor in the Thousand Year Blood War, which is the point of that. But I guess you could kind of say the Royal Guard. But Yodoichi is his first real mentor on the front lines. You know, Kisuke teaches him the basics, essentially, but then Yodoichi really takes that up a notch. And I think they have a really strong, really fun relationship that Ichigo doesn't have with too many characters in the series. I feel like with Kisuke, he has a similar relationship, but Ichigo's always kind of been on edge a little bit around Urahara, and that's really thrown up in the Lost Agent arc. But with Yodoichi, he's always kind of felt fairly easygoing, I think, and he's able to... She's not so much an older sister, although there is some of that there, I think. Much in the same way I said Ginjo was like Ichigo's older brother in the Lost Agent arc. Ichigo being the eldest child in his family means he doesn't have these relationships, so they kind of form with other characters. And the sort of jokey nature, the way they mess around with each other, but the way she's also tough on him when she needs to be. I think that they do have a really nice relationship. Again, it's not shown often enough, I don't think. But it is nice that Kubo revisited that in the Thousand Year Blood War arc as well, so that was really nice to see. And that's pretty much it for my video on Yodoichi Shihoin, the former captain of Squad 2. Originally, you know, the head of the noble house of Shihoin, kind of turncoat, essentially, all for Kisuke Urahara, because she could see straight through everything to the core of what was going on and knew that Kisuke and Tessai were innocent. And I think that kind of perception is really, really cool. And Yodoichi is undeniably one of the coolest characters in the series. Very, very well designed. Iconic in many ways. A lot of people know Yodoichi, they associate her with Bleach. And I love this character. I just felt that she was definitely done dirty in some aspects in the kind of final arc, and the way she was barely appeared for the whole midpoint of the series. That was definitely a shame. But apart from that, I really, really enjoy Yodoichi, and she remains to this day one of Bleach's coolest cats. That was awful. So guys, remember to vote on who you would like a character analysis video on next. Make sure to hit the like button. I'd really appreciate the support, and it helps the exposure on all of these videos. This one has gone on longer than I thought it would again. I'm trying to shrink these analysis videos down a bit, but it doesn't seem to be working. There's just so much to talk about. But all the characters so far have been pretty popular ones, so maybe when we get to the slightly more side characters, there'll be less to talk about. But for now, guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe. Alright guys, but until next time, I shall catch you later. I'll see you then.